The other thing that we're seeing happening, and this is now moving to talk more about the Obama administration, is that President Obama is pushing forward a U.S. agenda that John McCain and Sarah Palin would never have been able to advance. And Obama is sort of cleaning up the reputation of U.S. imperialism so that the tentacles of the empire can be extended even further. He has maintained the doctrine of U.S. exceptionalism when it comes to the application of international law, U.S. exceptionalism when it comes to the situation between Israel and Palestine, where Obama talks about reform of nuclear programs around the world and yet refuses to do anything to address the fact that Israel is a massive nuclear power in the Middle East that actually has threatened to use weapons against other nations. In fact, I was listening to NPR when I was driving up from New York today, and I heard the report on Hillary Clinton's recent moves in the Middle East, where they now are backing down completely from the Israelis, and the Israelis are going to continue with their illegal settlements. And Benjamin Netanyahu basically told the United States what's what. Obama also has taken a very, very disturbing direction when it comes to the issue of domestic civil liberties and the rights of people in this country not to have the government spying on us. Obama, beginning almost immediately upon taking office, started down the line toward incredible hypocrisy and also committing war crimes. Obama on January 20th was sworn in. On January 23rd, he issued an executive order saying that the United States no longer tortures. And then he proceeded to announce a preemptive arrest doctrine when he went to the National Security Archives. And as Michael Ratner of the Center for Constitutional Rights said, that Obama announced his intent to violate the Constitution and then shrouded himself in the original draft of the Constitution. If you go and you follow the court cases where people are litigating torture, they're trying to sue the Bush administration officials for torture, state secrets, habeas corpus, the Obama administration has continued in every single case the line taken by the Bush Justice Department. In some cases, the Obama White House has taken a worse position than the Bush Justice Department did. I've been talking and communicating with scores of lawyers that are representing prisoners that have been detained at Guantanamo and Bagram, and almost all of them, to the letter, have said that Obama's Justice Department is worse than Bush's Justice Department. It is a chilling statement to hear from lawyers that fought for 8 years against the Bush administration, for them to say that Obama's Justice Department is worse. I want to give you one concrete example of what exactly I'm talking about, lest you think that I'm saying something that sounds wild or extreme. Donald Rumsfeld is named in multiple lawsuits stemming from the U.S. torture program that he oversaw and implemented. One of these lawsuits involves 2 individuals who died at Guantanamo. And the lawsuit is against Donald Rumsfeld and 23 other military officials, including medical personnel that were involved allegedly with the torture of these individuals. These 2 Guantanamo prisoners allegedly committed suicide, and the lawyers for their families from the Center for Constitutional Rights say that whether they committed suicide or not is irrelevant because they died as a result of their torture. Whether they tried to take their own lives as a way of escaping the torture or they were actually tortured to death is sort of irrelevant. The whole system of torture ultimately led to the deaths of these 2 men. This lawsuit was brought when Bush was in power against Rumsfeld et al., and then continues now under the Obama administration. Rumsfeld and the 23 other officials asked the Justice Department under Obama, the Holder Justice Department, to certify them as what's called Westfall defendants. The Westfall Act was passed under the Reagan administration, and basically what it says is that the crimes of an individual federal employee or the torts of an individual employee of the federal government are not the responsibility of that individual if the crime's committed during the course of their work. Does that make sense? So the government will come in and say, they're no longer going to be the defendant in this case. The U.S. government is now going to be the defendant in this case. It has never been applied to as high-ranking of an official as Rumsfeld, and yet the Holder Justice Department certified Rumsfeld and the 23 others as Westfall defendants, meaning that they no longer are going to be subjected to individual liability for the alleged crimes that they committed that led to the deaths of these individuals. In supporting that certification of Rumsfeld and the others as Westfall defendants, the Assistant Attorney General Tony West, who is Holder's deputy, submitted a legal brief in that case, and I want to read from that brief. in defending Rumsfeld and the others and saying that the U.S. government's going to be the defendant, this is what the Obama Justice Department said. The type of activities alleged against the individual defendants were foreseeable and were a direct outgrowth of their responsibility to detain and gather intelligence from suspected enemy combatants. West, Assistant Attorney General West, then introduced a summary of case law on this, defending the U.S. government's position to defend Donald Rumsfeld. And this is a direct quote: genocide, torture, forced relocation, and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment by individual defendants employed by the Department of Defense and State Department were within the scope of their employment. Genocide, torture, forced relocation, and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment by individual defendants employed by the Department of Defense and State Department were within the scope of their employment. Genocide, according to the Obama administration, can be within the scope of your employment if you work for the State Department or the Department of Defense. Torture, which allegedly was outlawed on January 23rd, is within the scope of your employment if you work for the Department of Defense and the State Department. Forced relocation, cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment, all of those are within the scope of your employment as long as your employer happens to be the Department of Defense or the Department of State. So when you read something like this and you understand that there's not a typo here, and you understand that this is actually the position of the top law enforcement official in this country, and then you look at all the criminality of the past 8 years, you look at all the torture, the yanking out of fingernails, the waterboarding of prisoners, the slamming of heads into walls repeatedly, the placement of a head in a toilet and repeatedly flushing it, leaving people hogtied out in the scorching hot sun, abducting people and taking them to third country hellholes to be tortured. When you look at all of that criminality, and you look at what history demands, which is accountability for those crimes, and then you remember that Obama said, let's look forward, not backwards. And you look at the scope of the investigation of the CIA torture program being so narrowly defined that a fly is the only reasonable defendant, where you have holders saying that they're only going to look at those people that operated outside of the bounds of the memos written by the torture lawyers, Bybee, you, Bradbury, and others. Then you realize that what we are doing in this country right now is setting a standard where torture will remain the law of the land in the United States when the commander-in-chief deems it possible. That they'll always find some legal acrobatics to engage in to justify the degradation of another human being's existence. They will always find some way to twist logic to justify these kinds of unconscionable actions. If Obama had really intended to stop the system of torture, it wouldn't be about some speech that you give in front of the Constitution. It wouldn't be some reference that you make in your inaugural address. It would be in the form of very clear guidelines that anyone who does this will be criminally prosecuted if you're a civilian employee of the United States, or you will be court-martialed if you are a member of the military. Instead, what Obama is doing, and Panetta and the others, is by sending that message to the torturers themselves that they won't be held accountable, they are saying that going forward, this kind of conduct is acceptable, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You can keep doing it because nothing ultimately at the end of the day is going to happen to you. So yes, none of us wanted to see John McCain as president or Sarah Palin as vice president. I'm certain of that in this country. Maybe there are some twisted vanguardists who thought, well, if things get worse, then maybe the revolution will break out tomorrow. But let's remember this. When it comes to issues that actually matter to people of social justice orientation in this country, the issue of the war, the issue of civil liberties, the issue of state secrets, the issue of accountability for past crimes, the issue of health care for everyone in this country, not a single one of those issues has been addressed in a way that's going to improve the situation. All of them have either remained status quo or have gotten worse.